time of destroying the crash site and the harassments that the families had to endure. The crime of keeping the airspace open that night amid those extraordinary tensions, even though they refused to close down the airspace, and perhaps most importantly, as the evidence suggests, that flight PS752 was brought down intentionally and was targeted deliberately. These are very difficult for the families. I lost my mom, my mother, Dr. Neda Sadiri, on board this flight. She was living in Toronto with us, and ever since then, my life, the lives of my family, and so many other people from other victims' families have been upended. They've been shattered. We don't want this to happen to anybody else, and we feel like after going through this experience, we feel that the responsibility has been put on our shoulders to ensure that we seek accountability and truth and justice to make sure that the crime doesn't go unpunished. Because if it does, there's really nothing that will stop vicious regimes like the one in Iran from committing these crimes, bringing down other airlines, killing more people, and tearing apart more families. So we are excited to see the reaction from the ICC prosecutor to this file, and hopefully he will take it seriously, and we will see impartial investigations.
Thank you for that. I'm gonna turn to our virtual guests, to the president of the association, Hamid. You've suffered a big loss, a big tragedy from the attack, but the association waited 2.5 years to take this measure to go to the ICC. Why did you decide to do this now? And tell us, please, about your story.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Joyce. My name is Hamid Ismailian, and as you said, I'm the president and spokesperson of the Association of the Families of Flight PS752 Victims. I lost my wife, Dr. Presa, and my 9-year-old daughter, Rira. Over the past 33 months, we have represented 139 victims' families in pursuing the legal case against the Islamic Republic of Iran and IRGC, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, before international tribunals. We were aware that one of the available options for us is referral of the case to ICC, and on behalf of the majority of the families. We decided, however, to wait for the affected governments to take this case in an international tribunal with the resources and means that they had. Our primary objective was to find the truth about this heinous crime, and we knew that other options like the public tribunals or domestic courts could not satisfy the full scope of the case. By the second anniversary, we realized that the affected countries lack the will and intent to take timely and effective action against Islamic Republic of Iran. Therefore, took it upon ourselves to seek support and assistance from our lawyers here to produce this submission in ICC. To this date, we have no indication of a roadmap to justice or a timeline of action from the affected countries, especially Canada. We have no clear indication as to how serious these governments are in the cause of justice. So far, the government of affected countries, they have acted with a glacial pace that has been marred by bureaucracy and the wishful thinking attitude towards meaningful negotiations in the Islamic Republic of Iran. We don't believe in negotiations in the Islamic Republic of Iran. We don't believe in speaking with the criminals that they actually committed this crime. We now ask these governments not to leave the victim families alone on this fight. And with this new chapter of seeking justice and referral of the case to ICC, we expect them to join us in our pursuit of this legal case. And we also ask the chief prosecutor of ICC to consider our case of crimes against humanity and a war crime, and to pursue the case to the fullest extent of the law in support of the victims' families' call for justice. I think we have suffered enough.
Thank you. Ashkan, I'm going to turn to you. This is a very big move today. We are talking, Lockerbie level. We are talking Rafiq Hariri assassination level by going to an international tribunal. So what is some of the groundwork that the PS752 for Justice Association has put forth before taking such move?
Sure. Thanks, Joyce. I start with a quick introduction. My name is Ashkan Davudpour. I lost my sister-in-law, Ghazal Nourian, in the downing of flight PS752. Ghazal was only 26 years old and a PhD candidate who had just started studying at Western University in London, Ontario, in Canada. Ghazal, not only all of her plans and dreams are perished by IRGC missiles, my whole family has been devastated by this crime, and our lives has changed since then. My wife still wakes up dreaming about Gaza and in the hope of holding her sister in her arms one more time. My mother-in-law still hopes she may be still alive and has not been able to cope with the fact. To answer your question, the fact-finding committee of the association started its work shortly after the formation of the Association of Families of PS752. We started collecting information and preserving evidence as best as we could when we saw the Iranian government had already done the opposite by actions like bulldozing the crash site or not releasing the contents of CVR, meaning cockpit voice recorder or the black boxes of the flight. And ultimately, we think they just did that to hide the truth and ultimately get away from it. We started getting experts' opinion from military and aviation experts who diligently and patiently supported our cause to this day in finding truth and seeking justice. Lack of impartial domestic investigation, as well as delays in performing a thorough examination by affected countries into what really happened on January 8, 2020, set aside what Iran claims, made us to proceed with publishing our findings in November 2021 in a comprehensive investigation analysis into the downing of flight PS752, a report that was closely reviewed and fine-tuned by military and aviation experts, as well as legal experts whom we had the privilege to work with. In addition to portraying available facts surrounding the downing of PS752, it also shows multiple inconsistencies and contradictions within Iran's so-called final report, as well as public assertions from Iranian officials and their leaked audio files. All this clearly suggests Islamic Republic of Iran is not telling the truth. The association's report and its facts has been extensively used in drafting the ICC submission, which my other friends and legal advisors can further elaborate on. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Javad, who's joining us virtually as well. And you've all devoted now, big amount of your lives in the last 2.5 years for this. I want to hear from you, and you lost someone very close to you. how have your efforts to pursue justice been received, overall?
Hi everyone, thank you, Joyce. My name is Javad Soleimani. I lost my wife, Elnaz Nabi, in the downing of PS752. Elnaz and I had lots of plans for our future after finishing our PhD study at University of Alberta, like having a baby, and now she's gone. And many of us still are in denial stage. We didn't get any closure. The Iranian government systematically lied about the downing of flight PS752 for the first 3 days with IRGC missiles, and they bulldozed the crash site. They hijacked some funerals. They wrote down on coffins, "Congratulations on your martyrs," and for their propaganda. And over the past 2.5 years, there have been several cases of detention and arrest of PS752 victims. And in May 2021, the Human Rights Watch organization released a report showing that the harassment of families by the Iranian government has been systematic. And we are, in addition to mental torture, we are aware of some physical torture of families of PS752 victims by the Iranian government.
Is this harassment happening in Canada and within Iran? Can you specify?
Both of them inside Iran and even Canada. The investigator in charge of the PS752 called me in March 2020, shortly after the downing of flight PS752, to remove my Instagram post criticizing the Iranian regime for the downing of flight PS752. And how can we expect an impartial investigation by a government when the investigator in charge is working closely with intelligence service? Because after that conversation, they called my wife family about my Instagram post. And regarding the PS752, 4 hours before the downing of flight PS752, the Iranian regime fired missiles at United States military bases in Iraq. And the Iranian government, amid significant military tension between Iran and US, while the US retaliation was expected, didn't close the airspace. And this decision, based on available information, was made at Iran National Security Council. And furthermore, based on experts' opinion, other than physical damage as a result of the crash, some PS752 victims' electronic devices were subjected to systematic destruction by the Iranian government. And in May 2021, the Ontario Supreme Court ruled that the downing of flight PS752 was intentional, an act of terrorism. The intentional act of keeping the airspace open, the technical capability of the air defense units that shot down PS752, and the technical capability of Iran Air Defense Network system, and Iran misleading behavior and systematic destruction of existing evidence all suggest that the downing of flight PS752 was intentional and couldn't be a horrific combination of some remote coincidence. And the onus actually was on Iran to prove that the downing of PS752 wasn't intentional, but they failed to do so. And without truth, there will be no justice. That's why we are here today for ICC submission. Bringing justice is not only about PS752 victims, it's about all of us. Justice is a common cause. And as long as there is no truth and justice for crimes like PS752, there is no guarantee that another civilian airliner won't be shot down by governments and militaries in the world.
Thank you. Navaz, I want to turn to you. You have lost your sister and your brother-in-law in the shoot down of the flight. It's been, I imagine, very long, 2.5 years, a little bit over. So can you tell us on the, personal and the emotional and just everyday level, what has it been to just see this delay happen and your efforts get stalled, whether it's with the Canadian government or the British government or others?
Sure. Thank you, Joyce. Good afternoon. My name is Navaz Ibrahim. I'm director and chair of the Public and Media Relations Committee of the association. I lost my only sibling, Niloufar, my sister, and my brother-in-law, Saeed, in the shoot-down of flight PS752. They were a newlywed couple, and their wedding was only 3 weeks before the shoot-down, and on that doom night, they were returning to London, UK to just start their married lives together. Along with them, there were 3 other newlywed couples, 29 children, 1 unborn child, and 53 university students, and 8 entire families. Together, 176 innocent lives horrifically ended. Not only the loss has had an enormous impact on thousands of families, having to press for justice so hard while being harassed by the IRGC and the IRI regime. Among the families of victims, we have cases of physical torture, and even the peaceful protesters who demanded justice were detained and received very harsh sentences. This systematic harassments and delays have also had an enormous psychological impact on the families of victims. We have evidence that even the electronic devices of the victims were deliberately tampered after the fact with their memory cards removed. And these were the devices that had sentimental values to the families with the last memories and pictures in them. And among all, there was the mishandling and misidentifying the victim bodies. We have information that at least 3 of the families received the body parts that did not belong to their loved ones. And we don't know the exact number because not everyone did DNA analysis on the remains outside of Iran. That is why it is extremely important for us to hold Iran accountable for all the heinous crimes that they committed in the shoot-down of flight PS752. And we really hope that the chief prosecutor of the ICC supports our submission.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm going to go back to our virtual guests. Alborz, you've also suffered a devastating loss, your brother and your sister in the attack and the shoot-down. You have family in Iran, so if you can tell us how has this impacted those who are inside Iran still?
Hello, everyone. My name is Alborz Sadeghi, and I am a member of the legal team in the association. I lost my sister, Sahand, my 5.5-year-old niece, Sofia Mami, my brother, Alvan, and my beautiful sister-in-law, Negar Borghei, in the downing of the flight PS752. We were very close, tight relation with each other, and we were emotionally dependent on each other, and we had plans, of course, for our future lives, to get closer to each other and live together. From 2014, since Sahan moved to Canada, I visited her twice, and she came to Norway to visit me. And we also gathered in Tehran for a couple of times, and the last time was during the New Year holiday of 2020. This tragedy had very huge impact on my family. My parents, actually, they're just living for fighting for truth and justice. In fact, all of the family of the victims are suffering from the impact of this disaster. Yet coming to closure, there is no independent investigation is conducted. Actually, there is an ongoing investigation in Iran, which is held by the armed forces, who themselves are the perpetrators. The families of the victims believe that there is no intention and will to discover the truth, and the investigation is formality and confidential. The law has no rule in this case. Harassment of the families victims was continued and continues by the means of threatening and creating terror. During the so-called trial, the trial was full of securities and forces to control and threaten the families. For example, on the second anniversary, families were gathered on the crash site, and the authorities were flying with the helicopter over the people for more than 8 times in very low altitudes to scatter the mourners. Rather than providing ambulances, they just send water cannon trucks. We, the families of victims PS752, are seeking truth and justice to hold the Islamic Republic accountable for the vicious crime they've committed in the shooting down of the commercial plane with our 176 innocent loved ones.
Thank you. Kurush, I'm gonna turn to you to tell us your story. And some may look on the outside and say it's been 2.5 years. Why is this pursuit of justice so important? Why can't we just turn the page? So if you can touch a bit on that, why is this important for the families and to you, having gone through this experience?
Yes, thank you, Joyce, for the question. My name is Kurash Dushanaz. I am the Director and the Chair of Government and Stakeholder Relations Committee in our Association of Families of PS752 victims. Pursuing the justice is not just personal things for us. It's important for everyone to realize this is absolutely important. Oftentimes, all this time when I've been talking and on the video chats and everything else, what we do in the aftermath, I remember who I lost. I lost my partner, my fiancée. We were planning to get married in the spring of 2020. And she was a wonderful person, very highly accomplished academician. And Dr. Farooq Khanam, she was really looking forward in her new job at the University of Manitoba, supposed to start on January, February of 2020. So I never forget the life, what we had, and the life we were planning for us to go forward on. And this has been shattered, and we lost all of that. And oftentimes people say, okay, the time has passed, and maybe you should guys start thinking to move forward. The time has not passed for us. Remember, right after this horrific crime and the pandemic, worldwide pandemic hit, and everyone's got their attention towards this pandemic, devastating pandemic all over the world. But we privately, we suffered, and we maintain our contact with the rest of the families. We organize ourselves as in an association, and we try to continue the fight in many fronts, which we have not really done before, because we were supposed to sit and mourn, and many people want us to just mourn. But you can't mourn when you don't have a closure. I mean, how can we have a finishing our mourning and grief without really seeking justice, the very minimum in a personal level to get closure, and then a bit larger scale for the truth? And Iranian regime has get away with so many crimes and impunity over 43 years. So this is not kind of crime anyone or any entity or any regime should get away with. Our fight has taken many shapes as a political advocacy, media awareness, and now this is a big step forward in our submission to International Criminal Court with our legal advisors who have done a wonderful job and to take this step forward. And this is absolutely important for all of us. We are not looking for revenge, we are looking for justice. There's a huge difference in our mind. And we appreciate the time given to have this, our voice be heard.
Thank you. Before I turn to the audience questions, we have many good questions coming in. Amir, I want to ask you if you can tell us what do you make of the Canadian government response in the last 2.5 years? Is it satisfactory? Were you hoping for more?
Sure. Well, I had the privilege of working in the Government and Stakeholders Relations Committee of the association, which Kurosh is chair of. We have had contacts with the Canadian government. We have worked with the Canadian government on multiple fronts. However, the pace at which this file has been brought forward by the Canadian government and its allies. You know that there is a coordination group, the group of affected countries, UK, Sweden, Ukraine, and Canada. The pace has just been really, really slow. It has not been satisfactory at all. There have been many steps that the government of Canada could have taken to this day that hasn't been. From the investigation phase all the way until, calling Iran on the lies that they are perpetrating. And now after the negotiations that they tried to do with Iran, after they considered the negotiations exhausted, which, by the way, everybody knew that the negotiations would go nowhere, given the conduct of the Iranian regime, how there was harassment, how there were cover-ups. After it was the negotiations went nowhere, we still, that was January of this year. 9 months later, we still don't see the further legal actions that the government of Canada and the other governments together should have taken. So the file has taken way too long. We hope that we will see way more accelerated pace of taking this file forward.
Thank you, Ashkan. I want to turn to you. There is an important legal question that came in from Ashley Burke at CBC, and she asks, what is the legal risk of submitting this brief to request the ICC to investigate? If the ICC says no, could it hurt the Canadian government's chance of taking the case to the ICC?
Thank you for the question, but this particular question I would refer to our legal advisors to respond to it because it's more technical in terms of
would
legal
anyone,
aspects.
would any of the panelists like to take this question?
I can, Joyce, I can answer.
Okay.
Roshan, go ahead. We have taken these steps very serious, and we have gone through almost 2 years of thinking about it, and we have advice from our lawyers, and we have gone through all the necessary precautions not to hurt any other case by going to ICC. We have 3 major steps as far as the legal steps we are looking for, and we are working as an association to support. Number 1 is the Government of Canada and the group of coordination group with UK, Ukraine, and Sweden are basically very soon they take this case to ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization, which is hosted in Montreal. And hopefully from there, once the necessary steps are taken, it will go to International Court of Justice. That's number 1 legal remedy we have been working on. The second one, we have been working with the Ukrainian prosecution team on their open criminal investigation, and eventually they're trying to go to the basically criminal court. So we have been helping with them and supporting their investigation by providing witnesses, evidence for their investigation. And we're talking about today with the International Criminal Court. This was the 3rd option for us to remedy in a court. And we take this extremely serious because we made sure any other court activity we have done over the past 2.5 years are not conflicting with one another. So they should be all working hand in hand for seeking the truth and justice. They're not working in cross proposes.
Thank you. I think this question maybe Hamid can answer it. It's from Samira Muhyiddin from CBC Radio, and she asks, as you approach the 1000th day of the downing on October 4, and given your extensive experience now on what it means to try and get accountability for your family members killed by Iran, what would you have done differently in your approach?
Oh, it's a difficult question, actually, but we have to consider that this was a unique situation. This is the first time in the history of aviation and war crimes and crimes against humanity, and the government or a regime downs his own plane, like leaving like just above the international airport in Tehran. It's unbelievable. Nobody has done this crime before in the past. That's why it was not easy for us to look at Lockerbie. You brought Lockerbie case forward. You talked about MH17. All of them, there have been war crimes and crimes against humanity. But for them, like for Lockerbie, United States and UK, they try to support the families and have a criminal case and other cases, and that ended to a trial against Libya. You know that. And for MH17, they had full support of Dutch government for a criminal investigation and for a safety investigation. But for families of PS752, none of this has happened. When we asked RCMP here in Canada to open the criminal case, they declined to do that. When we asked TSB, Transportation Safety Board here, to say that Iran's airspace is not safe, they declined to do that. When we asked the governments to join in the joint investigation, criminal investigation, they declined to do that. They just want to clarify that to Samira. I have to say, we had tried everything to change the mindset in our government and our affected countries, but we were not very successful on that. There are two different point of views here. The families, they want a day in court, but the government of Canada thinks about negotiation. And these two, they don't get along. I mean, we hope that the government of Canada, in this case, supports the families and come forward, support this ICC case, and we hope that the ICC prosecutor takes this case as a serious matter. We still hope, we still work with government of Canada, but in the past 3 years, we have done anything a survivor can do, and you have witnessed that.
Thank you. There's a lot of questions on Canada. Somebody asks, since Canada is both signatory and ratified the Rome Statute of the ICC, do you expect any help from them in the case?
I can take this one. Perhaps our counsel can elaborate on this question, but we are definitely looking forward to see the support of the government of Canada, government of Ukraine, Sweden, and UK, everybody that was involved, especially, but not only limited to those governments. Any responsible government can support our file and make a referral. So we would very much welcome any support that we can get. This is not a political issue. This is just the safety of air travel safety for civilians. So anybody with their mind to ensure that a crime like this will not repeat in future should find in themselves to support the file without any reservation.
And just a follow-up on that, has the Canadian government gave you the impression that progress has been made on the case?
It certainly seems like there is some activity behind the scenes, but unfortunately we were not, even the families are not given real updates on where the file stands right now. So we are hoping to see in the coming months real concrete actions. The families should not be in a position to seek justice on their own. This is a crime on an international scale, and the government should step forward. The fact that the families had to do it before any other government is telling in itself, but hopefully in the next few months we will also see the governments follow suit and speed up their action.
I mean, how much does, I mean, obviously everyone knows there is a Russian war in Ukraine. Given this was a Ukrainian flight, how much has this derailed your effort and your journey?
In this particular situation, especially regarding the criminal case in Ukraine, definitely has put everything in a back burner right now. Because just 2 days before Russia attacked Ukraine, the prosecutor's office, they were in Toronto, were planning to interview victims, and they were 2 days into their basically investigative work. Then they had to go back because of the families were in danger. And this is really direct effects of the Russian attack on Ukraine to sort of almost, because there's so much of atrocity going on right now, and unfortunately all the war crimes and everything is happening since, of course, affects what was going on as far as the criminal case in Ukraine. But we have been in touch with the prosecutor office, and they have not forgotten about it. There's still active investigation going on, but it's been delayed up to a point. But it will definitely continue.
Thank you. Maybe a question to all of you as a last word. If there is one policy, if there is one recommendation that you're hoping to see while you go through this legal ordeal, what would be it?
I can take that one. Go ahead.
Maybe,
We like to see this heinous crime never happen again, and the civilian airliners should be a safe zone, and they shouldn't be used as political or military objects. And we're hoping with this, with the support of the chief prosecutor of the ICC, and holding Iran to full account of all the heinous crimes they did in regards to the shoot down of flight PS752, we are hoping to put a stop on the future, potential future crimes similar to this.
Alborz?
Yeah, as now was just stated, we would like to have Islamic Republic to be fully accountable for the crime they committed, and of course, as earlier Kurush expressed, this is not revenge. This is something about protecting the future potential terror to other commercial sites.
Okay. Javad?
So I just want to say that from the very beginning, we said that the compensation is not our priority. What we are doing here, families of PS752, is not a personal thing. What we are doing is for the safety of all of us. And as I told you earlier today, as long as there is no truth and justice for these heinous crimes like PS752, there is no guarantee that a similar heinous crime not going to happen again. And the Iranian government from the beginning tried to close the case by giving compensation to families, but the majority of families refused compensation, and we keep fighting for getting truth and eventually justice.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is actually a very important question. The fact is, right in the aftermath of this basically tragedy and heinous crime, which we lost our loved ones, we started turning our attention. How can we do anything we can to stop anything like that happening in the future? One of the things we realized, and in our conversation with the Transport Department Ministry in Canada, we found out the NOTAM has been like a notice to basically airlines. It's called NOTAM. It was issued on that particular night. And that was only went to the governments, some governments, and the airlines. But the public, the passengers were really getting into this kind of flights on this situation, a worst type of situation. We had no notice of what's happening. Because if the NOTAM was sent, like a notice to flyers or to airmen, was sent to the public, also the flying public, they can decide for themselves and assess what kind of a risk they're facing by getting in that flight. So that is number one, what we have been working. And Canada has an initiative, it's called Safer Sky Initiative, which they're trying to get support in international bodies, including ICAO, to have this implemented. And secondly, we found out ICAO, which is International Civil Aviation Organization and one of the United Nations main organization, to guarantee the safeties of civilian airlines flights. It's been so bureaucratic and it's been so mired in political influence peddling. They haven't even get to talk about the condemning shooting down a civil airlines. And we want to make sure we see the changes in this body to do their job, to basically be effective in condemning the shooting down the civil airliner, and secondly, demand, like a country like Iran, to respect their international obligations. They simply get away with all of that without any problem so far. There is no impunity. There's absolutely, they have done everything and broke every law. So we want to make change in that level.
Protections. Ashkan?
If I want to add to what my friend said, I would call for an impartial investigation. I think what's missing here is an impartial investigation, and by that I mean a thorough investigation, but not just relying on Iran's scenario and what they are claiming, but doing a comprehensive, detailed investigation into the downing of this flight. I think that would, and then if the prosecutor accepts this case, you can just go through the details that we have provided in our report and just look into it and just judge. And we deserve the questions that we have raised in that report. And yeah, that would be what I would add.
I want to go to Hamid and then end with Amir on this same question.
Thank you very much for this press conference, first of all. And then I have to say, in a perfect world, the high officials of Iran should be behind the bars. Right, the day after this happened, they should have been arrested, all of them. But this never happened. And most of them, they came to the national TV as a hero for downing flight PS752. I think that's this duty falls on the shoulders of the international organizations and the governments to set PS752 as an example to the world, that nobody dares to do that again. Kurish talked about ICAO. ICAO should forget neutrality about this case. They should not treat Canada and Iran on the same level. ICAO should have acted on behalf of for the safety of the skies, but we just learned that in the General Assembly that they have in 10 days in Montreal, PS752 is not on the agenda there. So bureaucratic, and we don't see any understanding from these big organizations that 80 years ago, they established this organization to not see that happens again. But this is happening. And we just urge all of them to support the families and don't leave them alone on this lonely fight for justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amir. Very quickly.
Sure. Well, to go back to the question of policy change, I want to remind everybody that we are faced with a situation of possibly an act of terrorism that was perpetrated in an asymmetrical war to deter possible attacks from to Iran, despite the military actions. The action that they committed, the crime that they committed, was not something that anybody could have imagined. Anybody could have designed policies to counter. What we could do, though, was to raise sensitivity towards the conduct of the Iranian regime, to not let Iran make a mockery of the international regulations and just go by with full impunity and lack of accountability at every step. If we were to question the governments that violate human rights and question them, hold them accountable, I'm hoping that we could have a day where these crimes would go down with no more.
Thank you all. I'm sure this has been a difficult time, and this is not an easy discussion. It's rare actually to have it in Washington, D.C. So I want to thank you genuinely for sharing your stories with all of us, and wish you luck on your journey ahead. If you can, please join me in thanking them before we adjourn for a few minutes and come back to our second portion of this panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
of this event on the PS752 Justice Association journey for seeking accountability for the downing of the flight. This portion will focus on the legal efforts with an ICC submission that was made today. I'm being joined in this panel with Giso Nia of the Atlantic Council. Giso is the director of the Strategic Litigation Project, and joining her as well is Ide Dijkstal. She's a barrister practicing international criminal law. Thanks for both of you. A big effort and big decision today to submit a request to the ICC. Giso, if you can tell us how was this case raised before the court?
I think, well, first of all, Joyce, thank you for moderating this important conversation with the families who've joined us here in Washington, D.C. We really appreciate it. I think the big question that everybody has is, how can you bring this before the International Criminal Court? Because although the court's name says international, there are some gaps in where the court can cover. And so I think a lot of people are aware that, for example, the situation of Syria, what has happened in the Syrian conflict, has been very difficult to bring before the ICC because Syria is not a member of the court, and the UN Security Council is not going to refer that matter because of Russia and China being on the permanent members of the UNSC. Similar thing for Iran. So there's lots of crimes that occur in the territory of Iran that should be covered under the Rome Statute, which animates the International Criminal Court, crimes against humanity, and a whole range of those crimes. But Iran is not a member of the International Criminal Court, and so that's why we don't see active cases to date there yet. However, there's a number of ways that the court can have jurisdiction. One, of course, is if a state is a member of the court, but a state can also voluntarily give jurisdiction through a declaration to the court. As I mentioned before, there could be a UN Security Council referral, and there's some other creative jurisdictional pathways. Here, what's important to remember is that the flight was a flight for Ukraine International Airlines. The aircraft was registered in the state of Ukraine, and Ukraine gave a declaration of jurisdiction. They gave 2 declarations of jurisdiction to the International Criminal Court, and that extends from the 21st of November 2013 until the present day. It continues indefinitely. Under the Rome Statute, if a vessel, like a boat or a ship, is flying the flag of a state that has given jurisdiction or is a member of the court, then it comes under the jurisdiction of the court. Similarly, for an aircraft, if that is registered in a state where there is jurisdiction, then those crimes come under the jurisdiction of the court. So even though this plane was shot down by the IRGC by at least 2 missiles, and that shoot down happened in Tehran, the fact that those crimes occurred on board an aircraft registered to the state of Ukraine means that we have jurisdiction in this matter. So we think that we have a very sound jurisdictional basis for this submission. Otherwise, we would not bring this submission. We think that there's a very sound jurisdictional basis, and we're convinced that the Office of the Prosecutor will feel the same. I should note that there is an example from prior jurisprudence, or at least what the Office of the Prosecutor at the ICC has said, in a case that was very similar to this one in the sense that there was a vessel, a boat, that was flagged, was flagged with South Korea having, and ICC has jurisdiction over South Korea, and a missile launched from North Korea hit that ship. And the Office of the Prosecutor has said that they had jurisdiction over what happened on that ship. So we feel like this is a very similar situation. And as I said, we think we have a sound jurisdictional basis.
That's a legal precedent that you would consider similar to this case. I would more broadly, if you can walk us through the process of bringing this case to the ICC, what are the allegations, what are the crimes that you're taking there?
Absolutely, and thank you, Joyce. Well, to explain what has been submitted, it's an Article 15 communication, and so that's the technical name for the submission that we made before the International Criminal Court's Office of the Prosecutor. So an Article 15 of the Rome Statute provides a mechanism for a number of different parties. It could be a government, an international organization, NGOs, human rights organizations, and also individuals and victims. There's this mechanism for these groups to provide information and evidence to the Office of the Prosecutor about crimes that are Rome Statute crimes and crimes that are within the jurisdiction of the ICC. So that is exactly what the Association for Families of Flight PS752 victims have done today. They raised the case of PS752 before the Office of the Prosecutor and the associated crimes with what happened when the flight was shot down. And with that, requested that the Office of the Prosecutor examine the information that came with that submission. There was hundreds of pages of evidence that was submitted with that communication to the Office of the Prosecutor. So it was requested that the prosecutor review that evidence, analyze it, and then also to take further steps to investigate and to do further inquiries into the matter themselves with a view to potentially prosecuting, to bring a case against individuals who are most responsible for the crimes that were committed. So to outline the crimes that were alleged in the communication, and to start, I'll say that with these communications that offer evidence and information and evidence, along with it is the legal submissions about how those facts and how that evidence connects to the crimes that are what the relevant crimes are before the court. So essentially connecting the dots between the facts and the law. And so what was offered to the prosecutor, suggested to the prosecutor, was based on the evidence that was submitted, the following crimes could be investigated and potentially prosecuted. And of course, the prosecutor can investigate further crimes, so he's not limited only to these. So what was suggested was the following: the war crimes of using human shields, the war crime of willful killing, the war crime of intentionally directing attacks against civilians and also civilian objects, the war crime of outrages upon personal dignity, and the war crime of pillage. In addition, there was also crimes against humanity that were also alleged and argued in the submission, and it was the crime against humanity of murder and the crime against humanity of other inhumane acts. And I can go into a bit more detail on a few of those crimes if you'd like, but I'll pause there for now.
No, this is very helpful. I do want to, if you can help us understand, for non-legal scholars like myself and others, what happens next? Where do we go from here? And what is the best case scenario in this?
Yeah, I'll just tackle that first, and then I'm sure Aide has some comments to add. These processes can take a long time. So I think one thing to note is that there is an ongoing investigation on the situation of Ukraine. So sometimes when we submit Article 15 communications, it's to request the opening of a preliminary examination, which is the first step in a process to leading to what is called a confirmation of charges, or what we would know as an indictment. Here, that step has already been done in a sense, because there's already an investigation that's open. So our request was that this should slot into that ongoing investigation. So procedurally, we'll see how that goes. But these processes can take a long time. The first thing that we're really requesting is that there is this independent, impartial investigation. I think the families had touched on this in the first session, but the prosecutor general in Ukraine, their office had done a lot of work. They were I think they were one of the only countries, if the only country, that had opened up a domestic criminal investigation into this matter, and they were very committed to that. Obviously, with the very tragic events that have happened beginning in mid-February with Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, that makes things more logistically difficult. And so what we're hoping, because obviously the state of Ukraine has a good ongoing cooperation with the International Criminal Court at this point, it would be great to see this effort as a way to help move that forward, because we know that the state of Ukraine very much wished that they could continue more ardently to investigate these heinous crimes. And the entire crew were Ukrainian nationals that perished on the flight, and it was their registered aircraft. And so we really see this as a way to move that along.
So an investigation would, and what I'm hearing you saying is that the investigation that Iran did, you don't take that as credible.
I think the issue is that Iran does not have an independent judiciary. The judiciary is very much controlled by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. That is the same entity that shot the plane down. So it would be very hard to see how such an investigation would be independent. Of course, what we hope as lawyers is always that these things can be handled domestically, and that states will step up and hold bad actors accountable. But what we've seen here is that no high-level officials, none of the people that made the decision to keep the airspace open that night, none of the people that at the high level decided to shoot the plane down have been held accountable. There has not even been an investigation into them. And instead, there are a number of individuals whom no one is familiar with and who are lower level folks, if they're even affiliated at all, who are being put forward as essentially what would be scapegoats. So we do believe that any sort of criminal investigation has to happen from an independent, impartial body. That could be, it could be domestically in a state like Ukraine, or it could happen at the International Criminal Court. Also, all the states that had nationals on the plane, many of them are members of the ICC, and they can definitely support in this process.
And what is the best case scenario out of this, Aida?
Absolutely. I mean, just to follow on from what Yisu said, it's important to remember that the ICC is a court that is centered around complementarity. So it is meant to be complementary to domestic procedures. So what we would like to see is that there is movement within the Office of the Prosecutor at the ICC to move this case forward, to thoroughly examine all of the evidence that's been submitted, and to move forward with their own inquiries, but to also work with those national governments. So whether it be Ukraine or Canada, Sweden, the UK, or any other government that is interested in finding justice for these victims, that it's a complementary process that is not exclusive to one court or another, or international versus domestic. We'd like to see that move forward. It's been over 2 years, and so a best case scenario is that things move and move more quickly. Of course, we are acknowledging the reality that the process at the ICC moves slowly. That's something that is not exceptional to this case in particular, and we need to remember that it's going to take some time. It happens with
or decades. What are we talking?
What is very typical at the ICC is we are looking at years of moving things forward. Whether it's not in just one part of the case. It could be years for investigation, then to prosecution, to trial. We'd love to see it go to those stages. So it does take time, but we must remember that the Office of the Prosecutor has to review hundreds of thousands of pages of documents. They are doing this at the same time that they're analyzing incoming information about the current conflict in Ukraine. So what we do want is to make sure that what the prosecution does is thorough. We don't want a rushed investigation. We want to make sure that it's thorough and genuine and looks at, as a priority, ascertaining the truth. So seeing indications that it's moving forward in that manner is really a goal.
I want to urge you, if you're in the audience and have a question, please use our Q&A feature. But another question to you, how does this compare when we, if you want to compare it to what happened with the Lockerbie case or, the Malaysian airline that was shot over Ukraine? Are these sound parallels or not really?
You know what's interesting, and it doesn't relate necessarily to the matter that we've been instructed on, but it does relate to the handling of different incidents. With the MH17 incident, the ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, condemned what happened there. The ICAO never condemned what happened to PS752, even though it was shot down by at least 2 missiles. And so I think there are other steps outside of legal processes that also need to be taken to acknowledge the gravity of what happened here. But yeah, the ICAO has to this day not condemned what happened with PS752, but they condemned MH17. They also condemned Lukashenko grounding the Ryanair flight to arrest a Belarusian dissident. But they didn't condemn this.
How do you explain that? This means stark contrast.
Well, apparently, there's different theories. I think that the families of the victims probably have a few theories that they could share with us. But from what we understand, a new president of the ICAO had just come in on January 1st, 2020, so just a few days before this horrific shoot down. That's not an excuse, but it could be political. I mean, it's not really clear. What should happen now, though, is that the ICAO should definitely issue a condemnation. This is the scale of this incident is very grave. And I think as several family members of the victims have already echoed, it's really a concerning precedent for international civil aviation. Decades ago, there was a whole legal framework that was set up to deal with addressing actions of non-state actors that commit acts of terrorism against aircraft. And that's why we have a whole body of laws about that. But what do you do when it's a state actor that is responsible? Under the current aviation conventions that states are signatory to, a lot of times it's the state that took the action that is responsible for the investigation. So when you're dealing with states versus non-state actors, that can be very tricky. And so I would say that this incident just hasn't been dealt with in the way that it should by international institutions and those that should be issuing condemnations of what happened here.
If I might just quickly follow on when looking at the comparisons between the way that this case has been handled versus other cases. As far as legal ways to address this, when we look at the ICAO or potentially the International Court of Justice, it's very important to remember that the difference between that process and what we're looking at the ICC is that those other processes are more about state obligations under international law, rather than at the ICC where we're looking at crimes and individuals who are most responsible for perpetrating those crimes and taking legal action as a criminal case against these individuals. So it's a very different process. And it's a different process that the families of the victims of PS752 have the opportunity to pursue because of this jurisdictional avenue for raising it before the court.
Thank you for that. We have good questions coming in from the audience. The first one, should we be worried that the legal team of the Canadian government altogether drop their efforts now that there is an effort at the ICC?
Yeah, I don't think so, because just as Aide noted, it's actually a very different process. So what we're looking at with respect to the ICC is individual criminal responsibility. what the Canadian government would be advancing is, and I'm not part of the Canadian legal team, so I can't speak to what their plans are, but their options are to go through an arbitration process that eventually would lead to a state-to-state dispute at the International Court of Justice. There's other options that they can take, of course, including a domestic criminal investigation, which from what I understand, RCMP in Canada has not done. But we're looking at individual criminal responsibilities, so these processes can actually be very complementary, and they're not at odds with one another.
And anything you want to add?
Oh, just to say that even though the Canadian process that's being looked at with the government of Canada is something that's quite different to what is available at the ICC, what the association would really like to see is that the Canadian government support, and also other governments as well, support the process at the ICC. They do not have to get actively involved. They do not need to refer it in order for the case to go forward. We should be clear about that. The Article 15 communication of the association is enough to raise the case before the court and before the prosecutor, and for the prosecutor to bring it forward. But nevertheless, it would be very much encouraged that the government of Canada strongly support the case moving forward at the ICC.
And another question is, some draw comparisons to the U.S. downing of the Iran Air Flight 655 over the Persian Gulf during the 1980s. Can you explain why this is different?
I don't think I can really speak to that particular incident because that's not the subject of this submission and not super relevant to the discussion. But what we would say is that any sort of downing of a civilian aircraft, when it's intentional, like we have information that suggests that here, or when the civilian airspace was kept open purposely to repel military attacks, is of a certain level of gravity. It reaches the level of war crimes, potential crimes against humanity. I think with other instances of downing of aircraft, sometimes there are different reasons for why that happens. But here we're very focused on the criminal aspect of it. And so that's what this submission is looking at.
Somebody is asking from the audience that given that the U.S. is helping with the MH17 investigation, are you expecting anything similar now?
Well, the U.S. Did not have nationals on this flight. So the U.S. government is not who we're going to for support here. As I think the family members of the victims so eloquently put, this is a matter that every state that cares about the rights of the victims and those that have been left behind and about the safety of international civil aviation should really be in support of. But as I said, the U.S. is not a member of the ICC, so we wouldn't be looking for a referral from them either. But they also, they had no nationals on board.
And as a follow-up to that, a question from Amina Aghabali, and she asks, for those countries that have citizens, I think you've touched upon this briefly, but for the countries that are involved in this, what would you like them to do following today's submission?
Absolutely. I think we have touched on it a bit, and I think it's worth re-emphasizing. What we'd really like to see is that those states support and indicate their support for the Office of the Prosecutor at the ICC to move forward with this case, to investigate it, and to do so as quickly and as thoroughly as possible. So to indicate their support. Of course, there are mechanisms for states to provide referrals that expedite the process. That, as I said before, that's not necessary because there's already an open investigation into the situation in Ukraine where the jurisdiction falls, and so this case falls within an already opened investigation, and we're just asking that the prosecutor consider it as part of that open investigation. But if those states could support this application, this request for the prosecutor to bring the case forward and make that indication strong that that is really what we would look to see as an ideal situation.
Well, thank you so much for sharing the stage with us and telling about this important story. This has been very insightful event and really eye-opening. I hope we gather again and have more news on the ICC submission and where this journey take. And I want to thank our audience, and if you can join me in thanking our panelists for this really great event today, and then we'll adjourn. Thank you.